Welcome to the Alain Guillot podcast, a podcast about life, leadership, and money matters. Our guest today is Scott DeLuzio. Scott is an Army veteran, having served 6 years with the Army National Guard, including a deployment to Afghanistan in 2010. Today, we will speak about Scott's experience in the Army, plus losing his brother in the same war. In his book, Surviving Son, an Afghanistan War Veteran, revealed his nightmare of becoming a gold star brother. Scott, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me, and I really do appreciate the opportunity to come on your show.
At the beginning of the book, there was a line that I thought it was funny because I live in Canada, and it's when a waitress asks your brother if she would like some Canadian bacon in his hamburger. Can you, we're gonna get into the topic of the book, but can you tell us about that little glimpse of your brother's life?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my brother always liked to joke around, and he always was having a fun time and always tried to make a situation funny. And so that situation that you're talking about there was when my brother and I, we were Boston Bruins fans and the hockey fans, and we happened to go to a game that the Bruins were playing against the Montreal Canadiens, and the Bruins won. And so as we were leaving the arena, and if anyone has ever been to any professional sports event, you know the big mass migration of people, the huge crowds that are leaving to go to the parking lots. Well, my brother started this chant of USA, 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 and he got the entire arena screaming USA, USA, and it was just so hilarious. And so as we're leaving the place, we went to go get some dinner at a place across the street, and so we still had that like patriotic USA kind of thing going on. And when we sat down and the waiter said that there's Canadian bacon on the burger, my brother looked at him almost with a serious, angry face, but I knew he was joking. And he goes, I want American bacon. I don't want Canadian, and it was just so funny. And then he did the same thing when the waiter said, would you like French fries with that? And he said, I don't want French fries. I want American fries. It was just a funny thing. And so in the book, Surviving Son, I try to include little stories like that, that are sometimes they're comical, sometimes they just show the human side of the story. It's not just another person, another soldier who was killed in battle. It was this was a real person, and it was to me it was very personal, because obviously he was my brother, and it's just a very personal story, and I tried to include some of those personal anecdotes in there.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing that, Scott. So you come from a middle class, upper middle class family, and you are a white dude, and you decide to join the army out of patriotism. Can you tell us about your early life and where does this patriotism comes from, and the desire to join the army in a moment of need and a moment of despair in American history?
Yeah, so my brother and I both were raised in a very patriotic family, and so when we were growing up, we during the Gulf War, we went over to one of the Air Force bases near us, and we greeted the troops coming back home from overseas, and it was one of those things where it's just big, proud, patriotic moment. And we have videos of my brother and I singing the national anthem and holding American flags and things like that. It's just, before we were even really old enough to get the right words out, we were out there singing it, and we were just always a very patriotic family. So after 9/11, my brother and I joined the army, and we saw that the country needed the soldiers, and we answered that call to service. And after that, both of us deployed to Afghanistan in 2010. And we're deployed at the same time, part of the same deployment over there, where unfortunately he was tragically killed. And I used that as fuel to kind of help veterans now. I'm using that experience and my experiences throughout the deployment and losing my brother to write this book, Surviving Son, and also my podcast, the Drive On podcast, where I talk about veteran related issues. But it all stems from that patriotic upbringing, which if I didn't have that, who knows if either one of us would have joined the military, after 9/11.
Okay, so in the United States, is people volunteer to go to the army as opposed to other countries. In Canada as well, people volunteer to go to the army, and generally there is enough supply of young men trying and women nowadays trying to
Mhm.
service their country. But one of the things that inspired you was that at 2005 there were not enough people joining the army. So can you maybe speculate why, and then how was that the trigger point for you to join the army?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know the exact reasons why, but I could speculate that maybe it was because we were at war and it was a dangerous thing to do. So you knew if you were going to sign up for the Army or the Marines or the Navy or whatever branch of the military, you were probably going to go to war at some point, which does involve putting your life at risk. And so, there's probably enough people out there who were saying, you know what, I could probably get another job and not have to put my life at risk and be okay with that. And so I think that might have been part of the reason why we're having a trouble getting enough people to sign up for the military. But when I saw that there was a news report saying in 2005 that the Army was struggling to meet their recruiting numbers, that it angered me. It got me upset. And I said, what happened to the proud patriotic Americans that were right after September 11th, who would have done anything for their country? And where are those people? Where did they go? And then I looked at myself in the mirror and I said, I'm that person. I'm young and I'm fit and I'm healthy and I'm able to do this stuff. So why not me? Why don't I go and join the military too? And so that's what I did. And my brother, he had his own reasons for joining the military, but for me, I can speak to that personally. That I just said, you know what, the country needs people. They need the bodies to fill these positions, and so why not me? And let me go ahead and do that.
Okay, in the past, I have interviewed a few Army veterans as well, and I wonder if you could speak about the demographics of the Army. I mean, I have heard that a lot of people join the Army, yes, in part for patriotism, but also in part because there is a economic opportunity. So there is a
It
little
is.
bit of despair, but also patriotism, and there are some that are not even patriotic enough. I mean, patriotic, they just want that college education or the paycheck or whatever. So
Mhm.
I have no idea of any of that. Those are things that I hear from different parts of the internet. So I wonder if you could give us more information about it.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many different reasons for joining, and I think each reason is unique as the person who joins. But I think patriotism uh, does play a big part in it, because if you weren't fighting for a cause that you believed in, then why would you do it? But there is the financial incentives and the other benefits that go along with it. Some people join because they want to go to college and they know that given their situation and their background, they may not be able to afford going to college. And so by going and joining the military and serving, that does provide you with the education, also medical benefits and things like that ongoing, after you get out of the military. You still have access to that. And there's a wide range of benefits that the military does offer the people who are serving in the military. And also, after you get out, given that you meet certain criteria for amount of time that you served and things like that, you'll get some additional benefits. So I think that's also probably a reason why people do join the military. But for me personally, it was the patriotism. Even if they
Right,
said, hey, you know what, we don't have any money and we can't pay you, I probably still would have done it
right.
anyways.
I have a family member who is in the U.S. Army, and that's his career. He's, I don't know, he's been there, is the husband of my daughter, and he has been there for over 10 years now, and
Okay.
he's there for life, according to
Yeah.
him. Maybe something will happen that will allow him to change his mind, but that's what I understand. I have other guests who have joined the army because it offer them some kind of life structure. I had two or three guests who say, "Oh, I was into drugs, I was into crime, and I needed something to guide me, some kind of a structure or something to shoot at." So I wonder also, I mean, I guess that's a positive benefit of joining the army. And when you retire, you already have this mind frame of,
Yeah.
how to navigate through life without alcohol or without getting in trouble.
Yes.
And as a veteran, you must know a lot of those people. So can you talk also about the benefits of joining the army and then retiring and having some kind of life structure after that?
Yeah, and that's actually one of the reasons why my brother joined the military, was because he needed that kind of structure in his life. He like a lot of kids, that he went off to college, and he would start to party, and partied maybe a little bit too hard, and his grades were not very good, and so he realized he had one of those moments where he had to realize that he needs to change something. And so he said, you know what, I'm not going to do this on my own, and I need some structure in my life. And so he went and he transferred schools first. He transferred to a military college in Vermont called Norwich University. And from there, he met someone who was in the Vermont Army National Guard, and he joined the National Guard through this person, a friend of his. And it provided him with the discipline and the structure in his life to be able to push aside those distractions, push aside the parties and the late nights, and say, what is really important here. And he was able to then focus on his schoolwork and his career in the military. As he was progressing through, he started off at the lower levels, and he worked his way through, but he was able to focus on those things and do the things that he needed to do in order to succeed. And so that was one of those life-changing things that the military does provide, is it gives you that structure and that discipline, and it helps you become a better version of yourself. Not to say that you couldn't do that on your own, but it's just a much more structured way, and it almost forces you into that better version.
Right. I see behind you what it looks like a military rank. Can you tell us what was your military rank? And I also read that you gave up the opportunity of becoming an officer because you
Yes.
had the opportunity because you had college education. So the decision of giving up that privilege of having a higher pay, more authority, higher ranking, all these attributes of being an officer.
Yeah, so the medals and the ranks and everything that you see behind me here in the video is all my medals and my rank from my time in the service. And I was a sergeant, so I was an enlisted sergeant. And so when I joined the military, my brother, he had enlisted first, and I totally respected everything about his service and him and his courage for joining the military. And I knew that officers had a higher status. So I went to college first before I joined the military, and so in the United States, anyways, you do need to have a college degree before becoming an officer. And so since I already had that degree, I was eligible to become an officer. And I knew that the officers had that higher status in the military, and I never wanted to overshadow what my brother had done and what he had accomplished, because I respected him too much, and I respected what he had done and the courage that it took to do it, to take that leap into the military. And so I enlisted in the military, and the lower ranks, and I worked my way up. And I talk about this in the book too, in Surviving Son. I talk about how I came to that decision and how I worked my way up through the ranks the same way my brother did. And I don't think that there was ever a time where the two of us where either one of us outranked the other. Maybe there was like a month here and there, where he got promoted and then I got promoted maybe a month later, or vice versa. But the two of us, we were almost at the same rank throughout our entire military career. And when I eventually did get out of the military, one of the things that they were trying to do to keep me in the military was they're offering me a higher rank, and I turned it down because at that point I was done with my time in the military, and I didn't want to stay in any longer. But it also enabled us to both be out at the same rank. So.
Well, you share your grief about you losing your brother, but before getting there, can you share with us the feeling of your mother when, first of all, when your brother joins the military, and then when you join the military? I mean, poor woman, as any mother should would feel having their sons risking their life.
Yeah, I think, it was one of those things where she was worried, because, joining the military during a time of war, she grew up during the Vietnam War, where she knew, people, either people she went to high school with, or whatever, who went away to war, and maybe they didn't come back home, where they were killed, or if they did come back home, they were really severely wounded. And so, she had that worry in the back of her head, which I think any mother would have, any parent would have at that point. But we also, like I said before, we grew up in a very patriotic family, and she made it, uh, it made her proud that we were willing to stand up and defend our country, that we are willing to join. So it was a little bit of fear mixed with some pride, together. But that was how she felt as far as us joining the military. You could definitely see it in her face when you told her, hey, I want to join the military. It had that worried look in her face. But I also knew inside of her, she was very proud of us for making that decision.
Okay, well, then you get deployed to Afghanistan, and I don't know what kind of fears or incertitude or anxiety you must be going through, knowing that soon you're going to have a weapon in your hands and it's going to be either kill or be killed, that kind of
Correct.
scenario. So, I mean, it's hard for me as a civilian to imagine this mindset, but can you share it with us?
Yeah, so that I was a different person when I ended up deploying to Afghanistan than I was when I first joined the military. So when I joined the military, I was single, I wasn't married, I didn't have any children or anything like that. But by the time I got deployed to Afghanistan, I was married, and I had just had a newborn son at home, and I talk about that in the book too. But so I only knew my son for a matter of a few weeks before I was in Afghanistan, and so he was just a tiny, tiny baby, and that was hard for me to not be there while he was growing up, and seeing all those first things that babies do. I just, it was hard for me to not be there, but also I had to sort of set that aside and say, you know what, if I want to be here for all the other moments in his life, I need to focus on my job, and I need to focus on being a soldier, being the best soldier that I can, and not getting injured, not getting killed, so that I can be there for him as he got older. And I also, I was deployed with my brother. He was overseas at the same time, and I also had to set aside my worry for him, because being the big brother all throughout our lives, I always felt like I needed to protect him. I anytime something bad would happen, I'd always stand in and try to protect him as best as I could. But when uh, when we were overseas in Afghanistan, he was stationed in a separate base, and he was in a different unit than I was in, and so there was nothing I could do for him at that point. I just had to let go of the situation and not worry too much about him, because if I did worry too much about him, I wouldn't be able to focus on my job and do the best that I could do. So the more I worried about him, the more uh, the more I was putting myself in danger. And so I had to even just take the possibility of him getting injured or killed. I had to take that out of my head and just focus on my job.
Right. As a civilian, the only notion that I got about Afghanistan is what I see either in the movies or in the news. From your perspective, can you describe a day in the life of a soldier in Afghanistan?
Sure. So a day in the life, I mean, it is a very hot country, at least where I was stationed. Easily, it could get over 120 degrees Fahrenheit in the summers, and it is just a very, very uh, hot time to be in that country. And when you go to the villages and see the people who are there, the image that came to my mind was like the stories of like the biblical times, way back when, Jesus was walking the earth, when you had, there was no electricity, no running water, none of that. And the houses were made from mud bricks that they fashioned together, and they made a house with straw roofs. And the only difference between that and what I would imagine the biblical times to be would be the fact that they had cell phones, cars, AK-47 rifles, and grenades and those types of weapons. But outside of that, it looked to me like exactly what I would imagine the ancient biblical times to be. And the society there just hasn't moved along the way that a lot of our society, the Canadian, the American, much of the Western world, and in the Europe and things like that, where we have access to all this technology and running water and healthcare and all this stuff. We have access to all of these things, and they just seem to just be okay with where they're at. They're not looking to progress into, the call it modern world, if you will. They're okay with what they have, and so, you know it's just a different situation over there. But when you deal with the people over there, they are a lot of times they are out to just benefit themselves. If you have money to offer them, if you have a job to offer them, if you have something to offer them, they're your best friend. But as soon as that goes away, they could very easily become your enemy. And so it's a difficult thing when you think about the previous wars, World War II and things like that. You had the German army who had the German army uniforms, and you had the American army who had American army uniforms, and you knew who the enemy was. You could easily tell just by what the clothes that they were wearing. But the enemy over in Afghanistan, they blend into the civilian population very easily, because they don't wear any uniforms. They wear normal everyday civilian clothes, and they blend into that population very easily. And so it's a difficult war to fight, because you never know who the bad guy is until they start shooting. And so it's a very hard war to fight when you don't know who the good guys are and who the bad guys are.
Right. The United States spent 20 years in Afghanistan. When you enlisted, you knew that this war was going to be a long-term war. It wasn't going to be like a 1 year or something of that nature. But after 20 years, do you think maybe were there any soldiers questioning the mission? Like, wow, we have been here a long time. We don't see any progress, nothing. I mean, some things were changing, but obviously way more could have been done on 20 years. Or maybe as a soldier, you could have thought that the job was finished. It was time to leave. So I don't know where you stand mentally on that.
Mhm.
But yeah, from your perspective, you think the United States overstayed their welcome in the country?
Well, there are some people who feel like we fought a 1 year war 20 times over there, right? So it's like we did the same thing over and over, and it just almost didn't feel like it was accomplishing anything. And one of the things that I feel like could have been better defined is, what does victory mean? What does a win mean in this war? And then work towards that goal. In World War II, we had a very clear objective of what that victory looked like, and so we went and we did that, and we fought and we won. I think that's a clear example of saying that's a win. But in this war in Afghanistan, I don't know that there was really a very clear definition of what winning was. But at the same time, I don't feel like it was a wasted effort, that the lives were lost for nothing. Like my brother's life, I don't feel like his death was meaningless. I feel like a lot of good was done, because we were able to keep the fight over in Afghanistan, as opposed to having another 9/11 attack here in the United States or elsewhere in Canada, other places. We were able to kind of keep big planes from crashing into buildings by keeping the fight over there. Not to say that there weren't other terrorist attacks and things like that had taken place, but they weren't necessarily on the scale of a 9/11 attack. And so in that way, I feel like we saved countless lives by doing that. We saved countless American lives because of not having another 9/11 attack. And we also saved Afghan lives, the people who of Afghanistan. We saved their lives as well because they didn't have to live under that Taliban rule for those 20 years. And so I'm confident in saying that there are people who are walking on this earth today who are walking there because of the stuff that we did over in Afghanistan. And all of the good that we did, I think, sometimes gets looked over. Like, people forget about the good that we did because of how bad the situation currently is. But I think we've given so much to the people of Afghanistan, between the schools and the bridges and the water and the electricity and the roads and everything that we did for them. And we gave them a little bit of freedom. Think about some of the girls who never would have had a chance to go to school, but we allowed them to go to school without having the Taliban there. And there's some freedom that they got to enjoy. And I hope that is enough that they are willing to go out and fight for their own freedom against the Taliban who took back over.
Yeah, well, it looked like they didn't have the courage or their strength to face the Taliban. But let me, before we get in that conversation, let me ask you. So you are doing your day-to-day job as a soldier, and then all of a sudden you get the news that your brother is hit. Can you describe the emotions that you felt, the
Yes.
frustration, anger, and I don't know, whatever is it that went through your mind and heart at that time?
Yeah. So when I found out that my brother was killed, the commanding officer, he told me the bad news. And at first, the way he told me, he said that my brother had been involved in an ambush and that he got hit, but he didn't say that he was killed. And so my mind, as the big brother, the protector, my mind went to, okay, how do I help him? Let me get to him. Let me, if he needs, blood, a blood donation or an organ transfer or something like that. If I have something in me that he could use and I don't need it, he can have it, And so that was my first reaction was how do I help him? And then my commanding officer said, no, you don't understand. He was killed. And so I broke down. I was crying. I was sad. I was grieving. It was a very emotional time for me. And I think a lot of people can relate to that situation because it was just the emotion, the wave of emotion that comes over you, and it just takes over and takes control. But somewhere around 20 minutes or so after finding out that my brother was killed, our own unit started getting attacked by the Taliban as well. And so I had to take that sadness and the grieving and I had to put it aside, and I had to go back into army mode and be a soldier. And I had soldiers who were under me who relied on me for leading them, and I needed to be there for them because the last thing I wanted was anything bad to happen to them or to me, because my head wasn't there and I wasn't doing the job that I needed to do. And so I put the grieving aside, but I turned that grieving into anger and frustration and hatred. And I felt this anger towards the people of Afghanistan for not being able to take care of themselves and not and making it so that people like my brother had to be in Afghanistan and had to die for them, and it was just straight pure anger. And I remember looking at some of the Afghan army soldiers who were with us that day, and looking at them like I just had this hatred for these people, and I didn't even know those people personally. I just hated them as a group, And I realize now how unfair that was to those people, but it was just the raw emotions that I had at the time. And you know, I've since talked to some of the people that I was overseas with, some of my interpreters and things like that. And, you know, we've become friends, and, you know, we were friendly back then, but we've become friends, and we you know, communicate back and forth every once in a while now. And I don't have any hatred or anger towards those people now, but at the time it was just so hard for me to control my emotions towards them.
Well, I'm sorry again. I'm sure you have heard this word so many times already, but from me to you, I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
I wonder. So now you are in the military. Your brother is no longer there. You decided to pull out eventually. How did that happen?
Yeah, so when I was that day that I found out about my brother being killed, I was sent off of the mission. So the helicopter flew in, took me away to the main air base in Afghanistan, the Bagram Air Base, and from there, the next morning there was a ceremony to bring my brother out of Afghanistan, and I was on the same plane as he was. And so we went to Kuwait, and then eventually, I think the next day I was home. So within 2 days of being in combat, I was home in the United States, and it was a a tough transition. And when I was home, I just never picked up the grieving that I set aside that day, and I just I wasn't dealing with my own emotions very well, and eventually I decided that it was better for me to get out of the army. And there's a regulation in the army regulations that's called the Surviving Sons and Daughters, and that's where the title of the book comes in, Surviving Son. And that basically outlines how someone who finds himself in my position um, could get out of the military by just requesting a discharge earlier than their normal discharge from the military. And so I put in the paperwork for that, and like anything else with the government, things took a little while to process. But you know, eventually when I found out that I was getting out of the military, that it had been processed, I went to bed the night before thinking that I'm still a soldier, and that the next morning I get a phone call saying, "Hey, you're out. Everything got processed." And then it was like flipping a light switch, and all of a sudden I'm no longer a soldier. And I just had an empty feeling inside of me, where before I had this identity, I'm a soldier, and now I don't have this identity anymore. And it was like, okay, now who am I? What am I? What do I do? And how do I fill that? And so that was a lot of the process that I went through as I was coming home, and as I eventually got out of the military. And I talk about this in, you know, great detail in the book as well. But it was just this emptiness inside of me.
Can you describe PTSD and your struggle with it, and your readjustment back to society and having a more of a healthy mindset?
Yeah. So PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, is a mental health condition that occurs after someone experiences a traumatic event, a stressful traumatic event. And doesn't necessarily have to be combat. It could be anything. It could be, you know, you get into a car accident, or you are in, you know, a robbery, and you know, someone is, you know, robbing you, or something like that. Those are all traumatic events, and bad things are happening. And so that can trigger these kind of things. And it really puts you into different kinds of emotional states, and it's a little bit different for different people. So I won't say exactly what it is for everybody, but sometimes you just get shut down, and you don't want to be around other people. You just want to isolate yourself from the world, and you just want to stay away. And sometimes people they'll stay in bed, and they have trouble even getting out of bed and interacting with other people in their lives. Or there's a lot of different emotions that go along with it. But you know, for me, part of the struggle was realizing that I could end up having PTSD. When I came back home, I didn't even think that that was a possibility. I thought, oh, well, I didn't see enough combat to qualify for having PTSD. I just it never occurred to me that I would have had it. And so for years, I I just struggled with it. I did end up going to get some counseling shortly after coming home, but it just never occurred to me that PTSD was the thing that was actually taking hold of my life. And so eventually, years later, I ended up getting some counseling and going to therapy for it, and trying to work my way through the problems that I was having. And the one thing that I learned was that we all have emotions, and those emotions can influence our behaviors, and our behaviors can influence our thoughts that we have, and it becomes a vicious circle of thoughts and emotions and behaviors that we go through. And so if we have bad thoughts, that's going to create bad emotions, and that will create bad behaviors, which will create even worse thoughts, which will create even worse emotions and even worse behaviors, and it's just constantly evolving that way. And so one thing that I learned is that in order to have better outcomes, you have to break that cycle and start thinking positive thoughts. For example, I talked about the withdrawal from Afghanistan earlier, and it's very easy to think of all the negatives and all the bad things and all the things that we could have done, we should have done, and all we could come up with all of these thoughts of how bad it was. But it takes a little bit of work to think about the positives. And so one of the things that I've tried to do over the years is just think positively. Think of the good things in a situation. Even situations that anybody in their right mind would say, "Hey, this is a bad situation." Um, for example, my children, when they are learning to do something and they fail at doing it, maybe it's riding a bike or whatever it is, I look at that failure as a good thing, because I look at it like, now we know that this is something that you need more work on, and we can work on that now. We've identified what the problem is, and now we can work on it, and we can get you better at whatever the thing is. And so that way you can become the best that you can be at those things. But if you never tried, you would never know that you're going to fail. And so I try to look at things anyways, and it's not easy to do. Sometimes I find myself slipping up, but I try to look at things from a positive point of view, and that really does help with the overall emotional state that I end up having.
From your perspective, as do you think the U.S. government is helping enough the veterans from war, or is there a lot of room to improve, or is the help adequate?
I think there's always room for improvement, and I think the government is doing the best that they can with the resources that they have available to them. But one of the things that I talk about on my podcast, the Drive On podcast, is all the other people who are out there. There's other nonprofit organizations and other companies and other just individual people who are out there trying to make a difference for veterans, and they're coming up with incredible, unique, innovative ways to help out veterans. And so by talking about those things on my podcast, I hope to um, give them a platform where they can share what they're doing with other people, other veterans, and those veterans who may go to the government, to the Veterans Affairs, and try to get some help, and maybe it doesn't work for them. I feel like by offering these other alternatives that are very often free to veterans or very, very little cost, it offers them with another solution that maybe they would have given up hope on themselves. And so it gives them another chance to say, hey, you know what? I haven't tried everything. Maybe I'll go out and I'll try this new solution and see if that works for me. And the more of those solutions that are out there, the more people who are trying new and creative ways to help out veterans, through things like art therapy or music therapies and things like that. The more that are out there, the more chances there are that someone is going to heal in an appropriate way for themselves.
Right. I just have two more questions. I'm sorry I'm
Yeah.
keeping you longer than I promised.
No, that's okay.
Um, I'm from my perspective as a Canadian watching US news, I feel angry at the way how politicians try to use veteran families for their own purpose, whether it's one political party or the other one. They
Mm.
ask some veteran families to go there and serve as a photo op, and then the opposing political party does the same, and both of them claim patriotism. But I feel like from all the way from here from Canada, I feel like the political parties are using people like you and your mother and your father for their own personal gains. And I wonder, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think that that does happen to some extent, and I feel like the people who are listening to these messages from the politicians, I feel like they have enough of a filter where they can see through the fact that these politicians are using these people. I hope anyways. I know when I see it from my point of view, I look at it like, okay, let's see what else this person is doing for veterans, and see if this person really is the type of person that they say they are, if they really are supporting the veterans, or if they're just using them for the photo opportunities or the things like that, for the media attention. And so when I look at some politicians, I can very clearly see that they're using these people for their own benefit. But on the other hand, there are some others who are out there and they're doing great things for veterans. And so when they do have those photo opportunities with those veterans and the families, and people like that, I look at it like, okay, well, this person, they do care and they are doing good things. And so I try to look at the full picture, not just the one 30-second clip that you might see on the news.
Well, one last and controversial question is, also because I see news from the US, I see that there is a lot of controversy when a sports figure kneels down before a sports match, and some veteran says, well, we fought for the right for these people to protest, while the other one says, well, this is a disrespect for the sacrifices that we have made. And I don't know where you stand on that. I wonder if you have any opinions at all.
Yeah, so I mean, from my perspective, I feel like we fought for everybody's right to speak and say things that the way that they want to say, and sometimes we may not agree with them, and that we just have to be okay with that. And I feel like when, like, kneeling for before the national anthem is not something that I would do. I raise my children not to do stuff like that, and so that's not the type of person that I am. But I think by allowing people to do the things and have the freedom to say and do the things that they want to do, it allows us, it almost backfires on them, because it allows us to see who this person really is, what their character is. And so when I see someone who is kneeling before the national anthem, lets me know that that's not the type of person that I want to support. And I'm not trying to say that they shouldn't be allowed to do it. It just, for me personally, I'm not going to go out and buy their sports jersey, or support the people in that are sponsoring them. I'm not going to support them because I disagree with that, and that's not the type of person who I want to support. The types of people who are patriotic, the way I was brought up, I was very patriotic, like I said before. That's the type of people who I would want to support. But it allows me to remove the curtain and see who these people really are. And so I think that it's actually an important thing that we do allow people to do the things that they want to do and say the things the way they want to.
Well, Scott, I think we have heard plenty in the news and the movies and whatever, and it feels good to hear a first count uh, testimonial of what's happening, of the emotions that you have felt as a real person, not as someone who is advertised in the news or the movies. I'm so grateful for the book that you wrote, and it allows me to get closer to you and to people who have served in the military. I wonder if you could tell us one more time the title of the book and where can the listeners follow your work.
Yeah, so the title of the book is Surviving Son, which you can find anywhere on Amazon. You can find it on Amazon, but the podcast that I have, Drive On Podcast, you can find that anywhere that you listen to podcasts, and driveonpodcast.com.
Scott, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.